Sup everybody, this is Willie, and today I'm finally doing something that I've been asked a lot in the comments, which was what were my favorite episodes of the Backyardigans. So for this, I'm going to be doing a ranking of every episode of the Backyardigans, where I'll be putting them on a tier list and ranking them from best to worst. And this is what I'll be doing at the back half of this video, because for the first part, I'm going to shake things up a little bit, where I'm going to start off with a more unique ranking, where I'm going to run through all 4 seasons of the Backyardigans and listing out what I personally think is the best and worst episodes from each of the seasons, adding in some simplicity with the first part of this video. So before I get to it, I should elaborate on how I usually would look at the criteria that suit for what the best and worst episode entails. Where for the best episode 6, I believe it's always good to have an episode that features all 5 characters, because there's going to be no exclusion involved. Furthermore, an episode where the pacing does not slow down and is just fun all the way that makes it stand out from itself from that respective season. Well, for what I think is the worst episode of the season, just to clarify, even though I would rank it as pretty bad, doesn't mean that it's actually a bad episode at all. I still think every Backyardigans episode is good in its own right, but if we're just ranking them, there's obviously going to be ones that are just not as good as the other. So hope to clear that up with anyone who may disagree with my takes on episodes that I just don't look highly at. So for this criteria, I think it primarily stems from the slow pacing of the episode and how the storyline doesn't really resonate with me as much, to where I wouldn't really care much about the episodes on any given rewatch in comparison to others that have better pacing. So yeah, but anyways, with all this being said, let's get right into ranking the best and worst episodes of each Backyardigans season. So we begin with season 1, and obviously because it was the first season, it was in the infancy stages of the show's developments, which does greatly affect how the season plays out. And the batch of episodes that this season comprised of aren't actually too bad. So let's start off on the positive side of things. Some really good episodes that I can give an honorable mention to are something like the first 2 episodes in Pirate Treasure and Heart of the Jungle. They were really remarkable, but I just don't really believe they reached that big pinnacle compared to the one I chose. Episodes like from Secret Mission to Race Around the World were all pretty good, but they were just outmatched by the one that I chose. And the best episode I picked from season 1 is High Tea, also known as the finale of the season, because I feel like the one major part that props up this episode is the beginning portion, where it completely contrasts to a lot of how previous Backyardigan and also future Backyardigan episodes played out, where we don't naturally have this minor conflict of what adventure they're going to go on, since normally at the beginning it's already decided when the characters are adventuring around their backyard. But here we see how Pablo, Uniqua, and Tyrone are undecided on the adventure they go on, so they elect Tasha to decide, and she chooses to go on a tea party adventure, which obviously did perplex her friends, but as they went on the adventure, it really fulfilled what they wanted to go on. And although Austin wasn't initially at the beginning segment, at least he got an appearance as a somewhat minor antagonist in the middle part of the episode, which was great. And I like how this episode really props up Tasha's character, who really developed her charisma in this episode and shows the positive side of her character without her usual assertive personality that we're all familiar to, which is what I like here. And then for what I would consider not the greatest episode of season 1, I really only narrowed it down to 2 for ones that I just wasn't interested and compelled to watch and rewatch in the future. So the one that was in contention but ultimately didn't qualify was the cave party episode, which may sound weird, but I feel like I just didn't really get much from this episode, and I just felt a genuine lack of connection with the story of the episode. But what I think is the net positive for this episode is that I think the story thematically made a lot more sense and did not have inconsistencies along the way, which is not the same for the one that I'm gonna pick, which by the way, it's obviously Monster Detectives, because this episode just really doesn't resonate with me at all for many reasons. One, from the inconsistencies from a thematical standpoint and the narrative that it was pushing for. With her brief summary, Pablo plays as a soccer monster who plays soccer solo, and he steals one of the soccer balls, who happens to be Uniqua, and she gets help from a detective and Tyrone, and they break into the soccer monster's castle in order to retrieve her ball back. and they have to avoid playing with him or else they'll become a soccer monster themselves, which unfortunately they succumb to that. All because we were supposed to sympathize with Soccer Monster for being lonely, which the narrative here as a whole just felt really disjointed and could have been a little bit better if we were given some time to sympathize with the Soccer Monster more to really understand the theme of the episode. Even though I didn't talk much good about this episode, I still think it had its moments, but those moments just alone doesn't really help save this episode from being the bottom ranked episode of season 1. Now we move forward to season 2, and I'll have to say here, season 2 is personally my bottom ranked season of the Backyardigans, but despite that though, I feel like all the episodes just doesn't really have a low point, which funnily, the reason season 2 just doesn't really stand out as much because the episodes are either not that most remarkable or they just don't hit that hierarchy in comparison to the subsequent seasons that I'm going to talk about soon. But let's get right to the get-go. The best episode of the season, I mean, there was some to consider. Like, from Mission to Mars all the way to, like, Movers of Arabia are probably the strongest stretch of episodes that we got so far. Even the ones that came later are pretty strong as well. But for my pick, I'm going to be choosing Who Done It, because obviously this is one of the biggest highlights of Pablo's character. And every step of this episode just kept me engaged with it all the way. The storyline was very thrilling, which adding the mystery element to it really elevated it. And for some context, Pablo is a detective invited to a mansion by Lady Tasha, who is assisted by her neighbor Austin and butler Tyrone, and then they're greeted by an unexpected guest who is Uniqua. And then a mystery happens when Tasha's jewels are missing, and Pablo, being that detective, goes to solve the mystery of the missing jewels, and he just humorously accuses everyone until he finally catches the culprit, which was butler Tyrone himself, and it all turns out this was a setup by Tasha and himself just for the sake of entertaining these detectives in a little mystery game, which although it was a bit underwhelming on that end, it's the only thing that would even make sense for the sake of it. So overall, I think this is easily the best episode by a lot. And then for my least favorite episode, it's a really hard pick because you heard I just listed some really great episodes starting from Mission to Mars all the way to Movers of Arabia and even beyond, which narrowing it down was really harder to get. Even episodes I didn't get to watch until my rewatch, like the Swamp Creature episode and Special Delivery, they still captivated me. So at this point, I'm going to go for a random pick, and although I did briefly mention how I didn't click with it in the Backyardigans review, I continue to stick by with that take, and that is the Catch That Butterfly episode, which I don't think is that bad, but I feel like most of the misfortunes that happened in this episode felt very unfortunate. Like sometimes I don't really care when things get destroyed by unfortunate circumstances, but here I really felt bad for the stagecoaches in Uniqua and Tyrone, where they completely lost their vehicle and horses all for the sake of helping a professor find a butterfly, which is kind of insane when you think about it, especially since Paulo's only going to catch a butterfly that he was just going to let out anyways. But you know what, they didn't really express much disappointment when losing their job equipment and still stuck by Pablo's side to just help accompany him in reaching his goal. So that was nice enough for them to show the humane side of things. And I do believe Pablo's frantic hunt for the butterfly was also thrilling and humorous to watch. But still, I just think the pacing of it wasn't as strong, which factors into why I don't really click much with this episode. Especially since there wasn't really any other episode that was in contention for it, or I was even considering, so that played a factor into it. And now we go into season 3, and this is where the choices get really harder because I think season 3 and season 4 have the strongest batches of episodes in a season, which really goes to show how Backyardigans continues to deliver in its subsequent seasons, rather than regressing, which is very impressive. So for season 3, I had a hard time picking the best episode because they were just all so good to me, and I really had to narrow that down to how my criteria works and which one I think was always going to be good whenever I rewatched it. So this might be another random take, but I'm going to be picking Robin Hood the Clean as the best episode because it's just very exhilarating, adapting with somewhat the Robin Hood story alongside a very thrilling hero story where you have Austin playing as an evil mayor who wants his civilians to live under his dirty atmosphere. And we see how the citizens are just not enjoying it and they're just wanting to get clean, which is what Austin always protests, and he'll lock up any sort of cleaning product in his dungeon. So pretty much after having enough, one of the citizens in Tyrone go to find Robin Hood, and he finds him, which is Pablo, and he brings him back into the village, where with the help of disguising himself, break into the dungeon to retrieve the cleaning products, and then battling Austin, where he's able to win by humorously scaring Austin into a fountain. He saves all the citizens from enduring this dirty environment any longer, and Austin finally learned that being clean is also a good thing too. And I personally think Austin plays the villain role perfectly, which is a different dynamic on the show that we rarely saw up to this point. With that, now it comes to the tough part of picking which episode I don't particularly like from this season. So at this point, my pick comes down to an episode that I unfortunately lowered my opinion on the rewatch, and that's gonna be Garbage Truck, which ironically is the one that I have on DVD. But I just felt like the pacing felt a bit off at points, and I wasn't particularly that invested into most of the plot of the episode. I still do love it, and it does bring me some nostalgia, but when you're looking at other season 3 episodes, especially myself, there isn't really anything that it outmatches, because those episodes are a lot stronger and are more interesting for me to gravitate to on a rewatch, much more than this episode. So for a brief little synopsis, it's pretty much about collecting garbage, but the setting takes place in space, so it's space garbage they collect on different planets. But the garbage collectors are intercepted by some Wuxians who need garbage to fuel up their spaceship, which I feel like the show is trying to antagonize them. But if you think about it more from a different lens, they really need that garbage to help keep their ship running, so I can understand that. And they also save the collector's life at the end. Now we make it to the 4th and final season, and this is where things just get complicated for me, because I just continue playing hot potato on which episode is the best for me, and I just couldn't have a solid answer for it, where, let's be real, with an exception of one episode, the rest of the episodes are pretty good. Something like Follow the Feather, Robot Rampage obviously, Catch That Train, Lost Galacticals, The Flipper, like even the one where not all the characters are there are really fantastic. The one that was actually on the list, but then I dropped it at the last second, was Flower Power, which I do love because Austin was a fantastic villain in the episode. Where, like I said, I do sympathize with him because his whole motive was to get rid of his phobia in flowers, and I think he had such an interesting story when he reformed into Bloommeister. Where I personally wished it would have been nice if they had a follow-up episode to see Bloommeister in action to show his redemption. So for the episode that I selected, it ends up being Breakout. And I can list out a bevy of reasons that I ended up landing on this episode. Because I think, one, it's just non-stop action all the way. Because we all focus on two sisters in Unico and Tasha trying to break out of a castle they're in. And it just kept me thrilled all the way through. And the plot stays consistent, where we're always meant to root for the princesses to break out, and they successfully do, which thematically is satisfying. And I do like the part at the end where they show their kind-hearted nature by saving the guards who were stuck inside the moat, where despite the guards having the chance to take the sisters back up, they themselves know thematically it would not make sense, since their sisters did successfully make it out of the castle, so they themselves decide to let them go too, and that's what I like here. And although Austin didn't have much to do in this episode besides just being the magic mirror, he did have some fun moments, especially when he tried to mimic Pablo's face. And all the songs here, which I don't usually factor into considering the best episode, but they're all great, and all of them are super memorable to me, where I am just engaged with them. So yeah, Breakout is the episode that enthralled me the best from this season. And then for the bottom tier episode, there's one obvious answer for me, and maybe an obvious answer in general, which is sort of a contrast from season 2 and season 3, where it was tougher to pick which episode was bad, but this one made my choice pretty easy, and that is Funny Man Boogeyman, because I didn't care too much about the plot of this episode, since it was all focused on Pablo and Unico trying to catch who they believe is an evil boogeyman in Austin, but he's just a funny one, which he blatantly shows he is, but it doesn't seem to click in their heads, and they continue to try catching him, which does lead to some humorous segments of them failing to, whether they have spaghetti dropped on their heads or even flashing their cameras in their eyes. But eventually, after watching his show, they were able to trap him, but unaware that he has the magic power to just break himself out, he finally learned that the pair were trying to catch him, which he had to prove to them that he is not a scary guy, and he does so, and it clears up their understanding. So there is some merit this episode entails because of these funny segments, but the plot as a whole just didn't resonate with me too much, and especially because other season 4 episodes are just better than this one, I have no choice but to rank this at the bottom. Like it or not, it just don't give me that charisma or thrill that I would care for. So yeah. And with all this being said, I finally listened out my favorite and least favorite episodes from each seasons of the Backyardigans. Let me know what you think and what episodes you would consider the best or worst, and give a reason why too. So now we get into the tier list, so that I can rank every episode of the Backyardigans from best to worst. So with that, here we go. So here is my rankings of every Backyardigans episode. It's not completely solid for me, but as of right now, this is how I would rank every episode if I were to do it at this current point. And you can see here, there's a lot of interesting takes I made here. And for more deeper insight, I'll run through each tier and give my reasons why I rank these episodes there. So starting off with the SS tier, which is what I would say is my top favorite episodes from the show. They're all very grand episodes that stand out a lot to me when I think about the show. And majority of them are obviously season 4 episodes, with Breakout at this point, in my opinion, is the best episode of the show. Just inching out Who Done It, which was also epic too. Then for the S tier, which I would call the secondary tier, I have episodes that nearly edged out to the top, but just didn't land on the grand scale like the ones above it did. And on par with the SS tier, most of it is season 4 episodes, with a few season 3 and 1 episodes. I think they're all thrilling, and I always have a level of nostalgia for them, but they just don't have much stronger elements to it to propel it even further onto the ranking. The A tier, which I would describe it as the competent level of episodes, where I do think they have really strong moments throughout and are decent on any given rewatches. Once again, season 4 episodes dominating another tier list, followed by several season 3 episodes and a few from season 2. I think they're all episodes that have really great storylines that keep me enthralled with the episodes, but just don't hit the high highs when you compare them. Then for the B tier, which you see has the most episodes on the list, I would call the tier of decently enjoyable episodes, but are just ones that I would watch when I feel the interest to. So you see here, it's pretty much the leftovers of season 4 episodes, with the bottom ranked episode from that season not even being at the bottom of this list, which goes to show how strong later seasons of Backyardigans were. And the rest of them, I just find them thrilling and I love the music, but those moments don't really help with some of the slow pacings these episodes have. So yeah, now to the C tier, which is comprises of episodes that I would say are fine. Doesn't have the most consistent pacing, but are just alright to me that I would even consider rewatching them. I mean, when you're observing it, you can see how this is where the remaining episodes of season 3 ends off, leaving us with just the first 2 seasons left to rank episodes from. I don't mind any of these, but I do think times with these episodes, the pacing just slows down at multiple times, which can affect my enjoyment with the episode. Now we go to the D tier, and I'm potentially going to make some rearrangements here even after the video, but are episodes from what I would describe as ones that I don't really click too much with, especially from the impact of what I call ones that I don't really care for the storyline of the episodes because it didn't really entertain me that much, which I still do get enjoyment from, but are just episodes that I would not have on my priorities of Backyardigan episodes that I would consider to be good. And then finally the F tier, which only has one season 1 episode, and even though it's at the very bottom, it's not like the worst in the world that I would never recommend this episode, but I still think it's an episode that wouldn't ever be on my top priority of rewatching if I were to get some nostalgia from, as I do think the theme of the episode was just kind of disjointed and inconsistent, that it really didn't make sense for a lot of it. And it does harm with how I look at the episode from a more general standpoint. It also doesn't help the fact that it continues kind of the repetitive trio that we are all very well familiar with, which I don't really mind it, but when you continue seeing this dynamic over and over and over again from previous episodes, it just gets a little stale along the way, especially since this is only the first season and there's a few more seasons to go, which thankfully they didn't try continuing focusing on it that often and began focusing on newer dynamics that would feel more fresh to us. So overall, that is my ranking, which to iterate is not the most solid for me. There's still episodes I would consider switching its places, so this tentative ranking could have some changes over time, but as of the current point, this is how I would look at them. With all of this, I appreciate you all tuning in to watch me rank every episode of the Backyardigans, and also listing out the best and worst episode from each season of it, so that I can go a little bit more in depth on why I perceive those episodes in that way. And moving forward, I'll also do some other videos similarly like this so that it could be more interesting to see how I compare episodes from a show and rank them. Thanks a lot, and I'll be back in another video.